Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sports Scene. It's July 22nd, and big time sports are nearly back, and we couldn't be more excited here on Season 12, Episode 8. My name is Aiden Berg, and today I am joined by Lauren LaBruna, Nick Kaufman, and Reagan Griffin Jr. How are you all doing today?
Great.
Great. Yeah, excited to be back on.
What was that, Reagan?
It's raining outside, so could be better. It's thunderstorming, Memphis, Tennessee. You guys don't know about that. California kids don't.
Yeah, Reagan, you got to come back to LA, Reagan. It's nice and sunny outside my window right now.
Thanks for rubbing that in my face, man. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem.
We're already off to a roaring start, and you can tell everybody's really glad to be with each other after that start. But we're going to get into our first topic of the day, which is the announcement that came in that the University of Texas at Austin is planning to fill its stadium to 50% capacity when the college football season starts in the fall. The Longhorns kick off September 5th against South Florida, and if the university has its way, there will be around 50,000 fans in attendance. So to my wonderful colleagues, how do you see this plan working out?
I think it's not actually going to happen. I don't think Texas will start on September 5th. And if they do, there won't be fans in the stadium. I think what this is doing is Texas is having a set start date of September 5th. We expect fans in the stadium so that the game crew, the stadium crew, everyone working around that game day experience, especially during COVID, they have time to prepare and they have a hard date they need to be ready by. Because it's easier, I feel, in this situation to set the date further back so that this team, these people aren't scrambling to figure out how they're going to have fans in the stadium safely. Whereas if they say we're going to start on October 5th and then push it up earlier, then it could be problematic because they don't have all the correct safety protocols in place. So then everyone's kind of scrambling. It could be just sort of a mishmash of things. So it's really Texas, I think, being partially optimistic, wanting to say we will have fans this season, but also just sort of getting ready for when fans do come at a later date.
I agree. I think that it creates kind of a sort of excitement. Obviously, everyone wants football season to happen. And I do think September 5th is a little early. I think there's really no telling of what will happen till then. Obviously, we've seen a fluctuation of cases across the country at this point. But it's true, Nick, what you're saying, that they're probably just trying to prepare for the best case scenario. And realistically, most stadiums and most sports teams are going to have to figure out how they are going to have fans, if they aren't going to have fans, and they're going to have to take those safety measures to at least try to attempt to have some people in their stadium. But again, I really don't think it will happen. And I think we're going to have to wait till September to even see what's going to happen, obviously.
I think we as a country have fallen into this rabbit hole of trying to predict things and predict this sort of coronavirus situation to open up and allow us to be a little bit more free moving before we actually have the grounding to do so. So I'm not sure why they would try to predict having fans in stadiums when there's no trend in the amount of cases, the amount of people who have passed away because of this disease. There's no trend that would suggest that we're good to go on doing that sort of stuff. So it doesn't really make sense to me. Again, I think we've fallen into somewhat of a trap of repeatedly trying to predict things happening when we have no grounds for doing so. I don't know why they would do this other than the fact that they would like to be optimistic, maybe a little bit of trying to speaking it into existence, but it does not seem feasible at this point in time.
And yeah, I think that's a good point, but I think it kind of meshes with what Nick was saying in terms of, and something that you added about it being optimistic and not necessarily based on facts or the science behind it, but in trying to kind of like put that date in the future to get fans excited about the potential of it coming back, because of how kind of random and unknown everything with this process is. Once they get to that point, they can just kind of say, well, this thing came up and we didn't realize how serious it was going to be at that point. So it's kind of like a built-in out for them to be able to provide this date because of how random this whole process is, that they could say, well, we haven't seen anything like this before, so we wanted to try to provide this date and see if we could go as normal, but it just didn't really work out. So I think that's definitely something to consider with it too.
For me, it makes so much more sense to kind of, instead of trying to predict a trend falling in your favor, do everything that you can to prepare for the worst case scenario, right? We see it all the time with schools, right? They want to prepare to see if they can have in-person classes. So they're toting this line between having in-person classes or completely online without knowing whether they're going to fall one way or the other. Why not just sit back and prepare for the worst case scenario? That way you can make the worst case scenario as great as possible for the fans, instead of saying we're going to throw some of our eggs in this basket and saying that we're going to have fans in the stadium come game time. Let's try to have something to where we can make the fan experience as great as possible, throw all of our eggs in that basket without any people in the stadium. That makes a lot more sense to me, trying to prepare for the worst rather than expecting the best. 9 times out of 10, when you expect the best, that plan does not come to fruition at all. So I think it makes a lot more sense to just try to circumvent that sort of thing instead of trying to predict something that there's really, like I said, no ground of.
It's almost kind of what Aiden was touching on. They kind of want to speak this into existence. And I think they do have multiple people preparing for the worst of no fans or football in the spring or cancel the season altogether. They have people working towards that. But I think also they want to have an optimistic outlook to the public and kind of signal, hey, we want football to happen. we're doing what we can to make football happen. And it's sort of, I guess you could almost see it as like a gift to the fans of saying, hey, we're going to have football this season, or we're going to try to have football this season. And like I said, I think more than anything, this is for the game day staff itself to figure out how they're going to operate, how they're going to safely socially distance, and if people and fans in the stadium are going to have masks or not, how they're going to go about this. So I think that really they are preparing for the worst, but it also doesn't make sense to throw all their eggs into the basket of, doomsday scenario when we could have college football at some point this season. So I think they want to sort of spread everything evenly out and look at every possible option.
Lauren, I want to ask you about something that has to do with this. Texas specifically has been, the university anyway, has been kind of an outbreak zone. There was that report of multiple athletes testing positive upon return to campus. And then there are also reports from the Texas Tribune, I believe, that there have been more than 500 COVID cases at UT Austin since March. So that's kind of a big outbreak as compared to other places. How do you see that kind of affecting their ability to proceed as normal here and kind of like the viability of this plan happening?
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously a big part of going to college is your football college culture, and especially if there's such a large cases of students at University of Texas that are sick with COVID, it's only a matter of time when people come back to campus. I actually know a few people who are going there and they're still living on campus, similar to people at USC who still want to be near the university. If they are going to allow fans back in the stadium, obviously a lot of those fans are probably going to be students, or students want to be there. And a lot of the times we see a trend of, not saying all young people, but a lot of young people think that they're really invincible and may go out, may kind of avoid all the safety precautions. And I think it only takes a matter of a few people to create an influx of cases. You bring them all to the stadium and it's like, okay, here we are, say September 5th does happen. And it's like, oh, this like 200 people now tested positive for coronavirus at that stadium. It's like, okay, now it's all over for Texas. Obviously, they're not going to be able to have any more fans. And I agree with all of you, and I see Reagan's point and Nick's point, but I think that it kind of comes down to that everyone wants to be excited about this. Everyone wants football to happen. And I think UT is trying to make it happen, be like, oh, like, I know everything's kind of been crazy, but you're going to be able to look forward to and count down to September 5th, and obviously I think it's kind of creates a like false hope for a lot of people, but then maybe people are like, oh, you know what, I'm going to believe that things are going to be okay and I'm going to go. But again, I think it all comes down to time. Like we can't, like Reagan said, predict what's going to happen. It's just going to have to play out. But I think it's pretty unsafe and it's going to cause some problems, I think personally, when it comes to college students entering the football game with, I don't know how many people are actually held in that exact stadium. I assume a few thousand, but thousands of people in the stadium, I think it's kind of a recipe for disaster by September 5th, especially when Texas is a hotspot for the coronavirus right now. And it's the end of July. It's about to be August. So.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that, what Texas maybe should have done is actually what the NFL just announced today. While many teams in the NFL have said they're canceling season tickets, they're going to roll over season tickets for the upcoming football season. The NFL said today that all stadiums, if there are people there, every fan has to wear a face mask or a face covering. So I think that might have been probably a better starting point for Texas, is saying, if we have fans in the stadium, you have to wear a mask, instead of saying September 5th, 50%, let's go. And so really, I think it could have probably been handled a little bit better by Texas. And obviously, I think also Texas, it's not an SEC school, but it very much has that same SEC school mentality where it's football or die. And so I think they're kind of following in that suit of, we need a football season, not just financially, but because it's so ingrained in the culture there.
Reagan, any final thoughts before we move on?
I mean, I see where all of y'all are coming from, and I agree with most of the points that you brought up, but it's just, the idea of dangling that carrot in front of people's faces when you really don't know if you can give that carrot to the person, in the begin with. So again, I just don't like the idea of offering some sort of false hope, like you said, Lauren, to people when that really might not be the case at the end of the day. I know we can try to get people excited for football all we want, but we also have to have people recognize that we're in a crisis, we're in a pandemic, and we have to be conscious of that. Dangling that carrot, I think, is counterproductive to doing so. So I'm against it. I don't think they should have done this.
Yeah, and I just think, just to finish up here, I think it's just very interesting that UT Austin, of all the places, when it's been kind of one of the schools that's had an outbreak more than, maybe other schools. I think it's interesting that they would be the ones that came out with this plan and made this decision. Out of all the schools, this is one of the first ones that I've heard of where they've come out and said, yeah, we're planning on proceeding basically as normal. We're going to have 50% of the fans in the stands. That's, by the way, like I said, going to be 50,000 people in the stands, because UT Austin their stadium has a really big capacity. So that's going to be a lot of people coming from all over the state, probably all over the country, maybe even to watch the game. And I just think it's interesting that UT Austin, of all places, would end up being the one to make this decision first. But we're going to move on to our second segment, which is about a recent announcement in the Los Angeles area. The National Women's Soccer League is coming to Los Angeles with the addition of an expansion team that's going to kick off in spring 2022. The founding group is mostly made up of women and includes big names like Natalie Portman, Serena Williams, and then also to go along with former U.S. national team stars and Mia Hamm and Abby Wambach. So I ask you three, what are kind of like your first reactions to the establishment of this new team in Los Angeles?
I'm so excited. As soon as I heard the news yesterday, I was almost looking where to get season tickets. I'm all for this. It's about time LA got a team in the NWSL. They had one way back when with the first attempt at a women's professional soccer league. So now that, there's a team back in LA, it's very exciting, and it's done in the most LA way possible. You have so many celebrities and athletes from everywhere getting involved. I mean, as you noted, Natalie Portman, Jessica Chastain, I think Jennifer Gardner might even be a part of it. And then you look, there's the athletes, Serena Williams, her husband, Alexis Ohanian, and their 2-year-old or 3-year-old daughter, Olympia Ohanian, is even a part owner of the team. I don't know what you guys are doing at 3 years old, but I was not owning a soccer team. So I think there's just a huge amount of excitement around the team. And plus having Mia Hamm, Abby Wambach, all these former stars, not just for U.S. women's soccer, but just women's soccer in general, really shows the commitment and the desire to make this a huge premier club, not just in the U.S., but in the world. And so I think I can speak for almost everyone in LA in the area. We're all super excited for this team to come, and it's going to be exciting to watch come the spring of 2022.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm not huge into soccer. I'm not huge into women's soccer or men's soccer. But I will say in the U.S., we've seen clearly there's a dominating side of things there. There's the men's soccer team, which we'd be lucky just to get into the World Cup, versus the women's soccer teams, which are amongst the best of the world. So I do feel like that with a team in Los Angeles, there is potential for the NWLS to grow. Los Angeles is the premier sports market in the United States. Excuse me, a little bit of a brain fart there, but I do think with a team in Los Angeles, that's prime for it to NWSL. Excuse me, it's prime for it to grow. That's the perfect spot for it to grow. And when you have backings of like all the people you just mentioned, Mia Hamm, Abby Wambach, Serena Williams, that it's time for it to grow. And I think with that team in that location, it will grow.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of that, it definitely is very LA. And with that kind of backing, I'm not particularly a huge soccer fan either, but it gets me, and I'm sure a lot of other people interested, among the athletes that are backing it and female ownership. There's also, like, as we mentioned, like large Hollywood stars that are really interested in this, which kind of creates more of an audience. And I think it's a great time, honestly, to have this. Obviously, we're not expecting this till 2022, so it's not really anything to concern about the pandemic or if this can really happen. But I think it's a chance to kind of shine a bright light in LA and create a change for sports. And for, I guess, young girls also who want to play soccer, like, oh, wow, I can grow up and play here in LA. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what's so great about this is it's really bringing and emphasizing the soccer culture in LA, which has already grown exponentially over the last couple of years. And what they're doing, I think, is very similar to what LAFC did a couple of years ago when they just got founded. They came in with a strong celebrity backing. I mean, Will Ferrell's a part owner, and I think there's a couple other celebrities and professional athletes involved in this ownership group for LAFC. And so they're kind of following in that track. And we're starting to see this trend now come up in sports with former athletes sort of giving back to the sport that put them where they are. You look, Alex Rodriguez is rumored to be trying to get a group together to buy the Mets, and then you have Derek Jeter down in Florida with the Marlins, and so you're starting to see all these athletes really giving back to sport and buying teams and doing their part.
Yeah, definitely.
Even
I
Kevin,
talk about the LAFC kind of comparison. I think that's a really good comparison because we saw the amount of passion that this city has for a soccer team that's actually within the city. You know, the Galaxy are so far away that they hardly even count. But when you put a team, you know, right in the heart of Los Angeles, basically, that really attracts a high level of fans who live in the area, and that's like their sport, really. And that's not something that's been the case in Los Angeles for a long time, even though it is a city, you know, with a high like Latinx population, which is obviously a great, you know, feeder for a soccer team in terms of fandom. So I think that this will only do more to kind of accentuate that, and really accessing that population on the women's side too is really a great thing. You know, there's going to be so many girls growing up in Los Angeles who can look at a professional team in their area. I know that there's, you know, a great youth soccer scene in and around Los Angeles, and all of those people are going to have another professional team to kind of look up to. So I think that it's going to really kind of build off that in terms of popularity. I'm sorry, Reagan, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, to the point that Nick brought up about athletes coming back and now buying teams. Even Kevin Garnett, he's looking to buy the Minnesota Timberwolves right now. Sorry to redirect the conversation to basketball, but that's what I know. Either dudes, he's trying to put an ownership group together to go buy the Minnesota Timberwolves, it looks like. So I do think that this is a trend that's going to continue. In this athlete empowerment era, dudes are really figuring out that they are the people who hold the cards in these sports leagues. And now when they go and make all their money, they're going to turn around and want to become part of the ownership in these sports leagues. I think, you know, people are getting a little bit fatigued with the idea that, you know, it's the athletes playing for predominantly older white men. They want to see a different face in those ownership seats. So I do think that this is a step in the right direction, and it's a trend that's going to continue.
I know Nick said something about this earlier when we were planning for the show, but is this like the most famous, like interesting, dynamic ownership group that there is in sports? It kind of strikes me that way, the number of people that are involved in this, the number of big names. What do you think about that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is probably the biggest name ownership group we've ever seen. I don't think any other sports team, at least that comes to my mind, where really you could list so many A-list celebrities and athletes and so many different people from so many different areas all coming together to basically start this team. And I think that energy is going to feed off into the hype of the club as well. I mean, I'm kind of hoping they play at Bank of California Stadium where LAFC plays, because games there are electric. And as we were talking about earlier, LA loves its soccer because it is a predominantly Latinx community out here. And I've gone to an LAFC game. I even have gone to some professional soccer games in Europe, and it's the exact same feel here in just a smaller stadium, which, you know, growing up as a kid in the area, I was always at LA Galaxy games, and it just didn't have the same feel. You could definitely tell it was an American soccer team. Whereas at LAFC and in the Bank of California Stadium, it felt like you were at an actual big relevant match, even though it was one of the last games of the season. So I think we'll get this same amount of energy and excitement, especially at first with the new team. And if Angel City is able to come in and win and be a presence, not just with its ownership group, but actually on the field, I think it could be one of the biggest teams in LA.
Yeah, and I think Angel City, that's when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's the perfect name for this team. Apparently it's not the official name for the club. They're still trying to work that out. But if they came up with something like Angel City FC, I think that would be perfect. I think it really applies to what they're kind of trying to do with this. Lauren, do you have any final thoughts on this topic before we move on?
Like I said earlier, I think it's just like such an important time, and it brings awareness to like different kinds of sports in LA. It's creating more like women empowerment, you know, women's sports leagues, which I think is super important. And like Nick touched on too, with all these A-list celebrities, like more people are going to be inclined, and maybe this love for soccer will grow. I know that I've only been to a few soccer games in my life, but I would love to go and be a part of something like this eventually when it does come around in 2022.
Yeah, we will definitely be interested to see how this team kicks off, what their name is going to end up being, what sort of players they end up with. But given the pipeline of talent, especially in Southern California and the ability for players to come here and kind of make a name for themselves. I think that they could end up doing something similar to LAFC in terms of, having big names come to the team immediately and really starting off very strong. I definitely could see that happening. But we are going to move on to our third topic of the day, which is also Los Angeles news. ESPN's Jeff Passan reported earlier today that the Dodgers and outfielder Mookie Betts are finalizing a massive long-term contract. The deal is expected to keep Betts in LA for 13 seasons at over $380 million of total money. So my question to you, Lauren, let's start with you. Do you find this to be an overpay for Mookie Betts from the Dodgers' perspective?
I think I mentioned this to you earlier, but definitely I'm not an expert on baseball, but I just think I know it's like a super long contract, like 10 plus years. I think about 13 year for over or more than 380 million. I just think that's just obviously an incredible sum of money. But I think other people have mentioned this, you included, Aiden, that like if the Dodgers weren't going to do it, someone else was going to. So maybe I'm wrong in saying that it was an overpay, but just in terms of my knowledge with baseball, I think that is an incredible amount of money in a very long contract for obviously like 13 years in LA.
Yeah, well, and I agree. That's a super long contract, but as a Dodgers fan, I love this. Like Lauren just said, if the Dodgers weren't going to pay this money, someone else was going to come along the line and pay this money. So might as well have it be a winning team who has aspirations to win the World Series. And I think this puts the Dodgers, I think the last 4 or 5 years, the Dodgers have made offseason moves where everyone has said, oh my God, this is the year they're going to win the World Series. And I think this is another one of those moves where it's, if they can get Mookie Betts locked down for 13 years is a long time, but if they can get him locked down at least to a contract, big money contract, it's showing the Dodgers' commitment to wanting to win. When the new ownership came in, they said, I think it was 4 or 5 promises that they wanted to follow through on in their time. And one of their promises was spending money, putting a winning team out on the diamond. And that's exactly what the new ownership group has done day one. And so now you see if Mookie Betts' deal coming up, if they can lock him down, that's great, because then they have their core coming after, I think in 2 years or 1 year after this, Justin Turner and David Price's contracts run out, but then they have to re-sign Cody Bellinger and their other host of young talent. So this is sort of the start of almost this second era of the new Dodgers with its new young star-studded lineup.
Reagan, big baseball guy. What are your thoughts?
Huge baseball guy. It's hard for me to call it an overpay because I don't know what an overpay is in baseball, but I will say that Mookie Betts is one of the few baseball players that I am aware of. Therefore, he has to provide a level of branding that not many players in the sport of baseball can. I know of Bryce Harper, I know of Mike Trout, I know of Mookie Betts. So if you're in that echelon of players to where I know about you and I'm somebody that knows little to nothing about baseball, you're not just paying for the player, you're not just paying for what he can do on the field, but you're also paying for what he provides to the Dodgers as a brand. He seems like he's a dude that's going to get people packed in the stadiums, ready to see the exciting plays that happen in baseball that I'm not aware of. But, who knows? Maybe there's some exciting stuff that happens in baseball. But I know that he's probably providing a level of branding, which I think justifies the contract in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who watched him on my favorite team for a few years, the Boston Red Sox, unfortunate that we had to trade him away for nothing, but what can you do? He is a very exciting player. In the outfield especially, he's one of the absolute best fielders in the league. Multiple-time Gold Glover, a great hitter, obviously, great base runner. He is a very exciting player and someone that I think can kind of catalyze even more excitement around the Dodgers than there has been. Even though when they are good, the fans are really very excited about the Dodgers, and they have been recently. But I think he's going to take them to that other level from an excitement standpoint. However, I do kind of disagree with Nick about saying that it's not an overpay. And I want to draw a little comparison to Bryce Harper, who just a year ago signed a somewhat similar contract, although Bryce Harper at the time of signing the contract had better offensive stats for his career, was a year younger, made less on his contract that he signed. It's $330 million for him, which obviously it's still a lot of money, but it's less than Mookie Betts is making, right? And it was for the same number of years, 13. So that contract was deemed by most to be an overpay. So I guess I want to ask Nick, why is this contract any different?
Well, kind of like what Reagan was touching on, you're getting more than just Mookie Betts, the baseball player. You're getting Mookie Betts and what he is off the field, all the promotion and everything he's going to bring into the Dodgers from that. Because you look at Bryce Harper, he went from Washington to Philadelphia. That's not a huge market like LA is. LA, there's so many more opportunities for the Dodgers to capitalize off of Mookie's image and everything. And along with that, for the Dodgers themselves, they have to just throw that money out there. You look at Bryce Harper last year. If the Phillies weren't going to pay that kind of money, if the Phillies said that's too much to pay for him, there would have been another team knocking on his door. So I think we're just sort of seeing the natural inflation over time of contracts, even though it is just a year. It's basically if we don't lock him down, someone else will. And Mookie Betts is. I mean, Aiden, you'll enjoy this. I went and saw Mookie play at Fenway in a Red Sox uniform, and at the time I knew nothing about baseball, and he was sensational. And that's just what the Dodgers want. They want that sensational, game-changing player in their lineup, and that's exactly what he is. And if they have to pay a little bit above the sticker price, I'm completely fine with that because of everything else that comes with signing Mookie to the Dodgers.
But what about the fact that and I agree with you. I think that they probably had to make this decision just overall from a financial standpoint. You can't let a guy get away. And this is just the amount of money that players of Mookie Betts' caliber are making. But Lauren, I kind of want to ask you, Mookie Betts hasn't even played a game in a Dodger uniform at this point. Is that kind of weird to you to say we're going to sign this guy for almost 15 years when he hasn't even played a game for you?
Yeah, kind of like I said earlier, I really am not the expert on baseball, but going off Reagan and Nick, I think I'm getting like a different perspective as we continue to talk about this. That's not just about the player itself, but what they can bring to the team, like Reagan said. And I guess for the Dodgers, this would be someone that they do need. It brings around some kind of hype. And a lot of people would be wanting to go to these games to see him play. So it is definitely odd when you think about it, but I think for the Dodgers, clearly this is someone that they see is worth it. Clearly this is someone who will bring a lot to their team as a person and as a player. So I think it just kind of makes sense for them at the end of the day to do what's best for them and their team and their whole dynamic.
Does this oh, sorry, go ahead.
A little technical difficulty. But the dude's name is Mookie Betts. I mean, can we not bypass the fact that that might be one of the greatest names in sports right now? Mookie Betts. I mean, I can't imagine he's getting paid that amount of money if his name was Joe Smith. I don't know. I'm throwing out my best baseball takes right now, but the name Mookie Betts rings a bell to me.
Yeah, I mean, Mookie Betts I think is a fantastic sports name. I've always been a proponent of the whole your name really decides in some part how good you are going to be as an athlete. There's a reason why you think back to all the best athletes of all time. They usually have a pretty cool name. Whereas John O'Korn, little-known Michigan quarterback from a few years ago, was that guy ever going to be very good as a football player? His name is John O'Korn. So I don't know. Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, just cut out. But yeah, I mean, I think the name, it doesn't hurt him, that's for sure. And it's such a distinct, recognizable name. I mean, you see Mookie trending on Twitter. There's no mistaking who everyone's talking about. So I think it really is. It definitely plays into it, and it helps his image and his branding as well, along with the fact that the Dodgers can now say they have one of the top, easily 10, maybe even top 5 players in MLB. And then you add to the fact that they have Cody Bellinger. This is a dangerous Dodgers team if Mookie, in fact, when Mookie signs this deal and when the Dodgers lock down Cody Bellinger, I mean, you look at the entire top half of the Dodgers batting order, the entire batting order is dangerous, but especially the top 4 or 5 batters, it's just unheard of in baseball almost. It's a great time to be a Dodgers fan.
Do we think that they're the leader for the National League for this year, the most the big favorite to go to the World Series? What are we all thinking on that?
Yeah, they have to be the favorite. They've been the favorite for the last 4 or 5 years, and I don't think this year is going to be any different, especially with Mookie there.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got a lot of baseball knowledge to offer you, especially from Reagan's standpoint, but we're going to move on to something that Reagan definitely has a lot of expertise in. It is our hot take segment of the week. He's back to bring the heat again. Reagan, I understand that your claim has something to do with some recent information about a certain sports video game that a lot of people may know something about.
Yes, the game is Madden. And before I get into my take, I want to preface it by saying that I really don't like Madden as a game in general. Not a fan of the game because of its lack of realism. I tried playing with Lamar Jackson. Apparently, the dude fumbles every time he gets touched. I don't know. That's a new thing for me. I didn't see that on the tape watching Lamar Jackson. But what I saw is the Madden EA Sports, their quarterback rankings for Madden 2021. And initially, when I'm looking at it, I see Patrick Mahomes, 99 overall. That makes sense. I see Russell Wilson, 97 overall. That makes sense to me. I see Lamar Jackson, 94 overall. Could be a bit higher, but for the most part, it makes sense to me. But then I start digging a little bit deeper, and it's terrible. The rankings are just god awful, and let me tell you why. They're basing their ideas on players based on public perception rather than actual performance and production. A lot of P's in there. Based on public perception rather than performance and production last season. And if you're not basing this stuff off of last season, I'm not sure what's the point of having ratings in the first place. When you take a dude like Drew Brees is a good quarterback. He's proven to be a good quarterback in the past, but he wasn't a 93 overall quarterback last season, but by no means. And then what really got me was Tom Brady, 90 overall, higher than Deshaun Watson, higher than Matt Ryan, higher than Carson Wentz. He did not put together a 90 overall season last year. Point blank, period. The only reason he's a 90 overall is based on public perception of Tom Brady rather than his actual product on the field. So I'm very much hating these new Madden rankings. I'm sure I brought up some players that we haven't mentioned yet. I'm sure you guys are going to bring up some too. But before I get out of here, I do want to mention the fact that the most egregious thing that I saw was the equation of Carson Wentz to Dak Prescott. Y'all know I'm an Eagles fan. Y'all know I've watched about as much Carson Wentz tape as there is to watch. And I've watched a lot of Dak Prescott tape because A, he's in my division as well. And B, I've taken an interest in Dak Prescott because he's on the rival team. These two quarterbacks are not the same. They are not built the same. There is one that's clearly better. There's a clear talent differential there. And the edge goes to Carson Wentz night and day. It's not even close between Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott. And I'm fine with Dak Prescott being an 84 overall. But if he's going to be an 84 overall, Carson Wentz needs to be at least 87, 88 because he's that much better than Dak Prescott. And it's not even close. I'll hand the floor to you guys.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, I think we lost Nick there. We're going to work on trying to get him back on, but I'll just throw it over to Lauren in that case. Lauren, what are some of your thoughts on what Reagan is bringing with his hot take of the week?
I'm a huge Madden now. For me, just kind of like learning and hearing, obviously, like I said, as we go, it does seem interesting that clearly we talked about this previously, that everyone can concur that these rankings are like way off. And I don't know why like this would happen in this kind of game, but I don't know if it's supposed to spark these kinds of reactions and more people play with different players that they normally wouldn't. I'm definitely not an expert as it is on Madden video games, but I think it's quite interesting that they would put out these rankings and clearly have such a strong reaction from the players or people who don't even play it as often as others.
Yeah, definitely. The two that stuck out to me as the most egregious in the quarterback rankings were Deshaun Watson, who I think Reagan brought up. I thought he should be ahead of Rodgers, Brady, and Brees, even though I'm someone who big fan of Tom Brady historically, but he's definitely not on the Deshaun Watson level at this point in his career or at this point in their respective careers. So I think an 86 is way too low for Watson. I think he should have been in that kind of low 90s area, maybe drop Brady, Brees, and Rodgers more into the high 80s, in my opinion. That's where I think that those players should reside. But then another one that I think people are maybe underrating is Kyler Murray. He's a 77, and he is, I think, one of the most promising young quarterbacks in the league. I think he should be at least an 80. He certainly had his ups and downs during his rookie year, but he was really pretty good for a rookie quarterback behind a really bad offensive line, lacking in offensive weapons, and dealing with a defense that always puts him behind. So I think that he should be higher. That's another one that stuck out to me. And I definitely think that these ratings are based a lot on reputation, and that maybe even they're decided a little bit by the fact that they want to drive some conversation about the game by making these ratings, a little bit off. But I think the important thing to also remember is these ratings are going to change basically week one. They're dynamic ratings, so they're going to update throughout the season. So these guys will have the chance to prove, that they are the better player through their performance.
It just begs the question for me, on what basis are you making the ratings? Because when I see a guy like Aaron Rodgers, I want to say he was in the upper 90s last year. He dropped down. So they clearly took what they saw last season and applied it to what his rating would be this season. But they didn't have the same energy for a guy like Drew Brees, right? Not the greatest season for Drew Brees last year. It wasn't bad by any sense, but it wasn't a 93 season, nor was it a 90 season for Tom Brady. So I'm trying to figure out on what basis are they making these ratings on, or are you just slapping numbers on dudes? Because that's what it feels like, to be honest. The conversation is always Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott, Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott. Even though Dan Orlovsky, Mina Kimes, Dominique Foxworthy, all these dudes who watch all of the football tape will tell you clear as day Carson Wentz is the better quarterback. I'm not sure what they're basing the ratings on. And to be frank, it's a little bit frustrating to observe. And I know it's just menial video game ratings, but I still can't understand on what basis they're driving these ratings on. I don't, it's beyond me.
Lauren, do you think some of the ratings, especially for Brady and Brees, maybe they are driven a little bit by reputation, and these ratings aren't maybe accounting for the fact that guys do get worse as they get up into the Brees and Brady age range?
Yeah, definitely. Just going off of what you guys said, like those real world reputations, I think Reagan said, and you said too, Aiden, do have a large impact. Like I said, I don't play this video game, but I am a huge fan of Tom Brady on and off the field. So I guess that's why I wouldn't be surprised by that kind of ranking, but clearly you guys are. But like I said too, Aiden, you touched on that as well, that I think maybe they did want to spark this kind of conversation with their players, because then it kind of brings more attention to their game. Clearly we're all sitting here talking about it. I'm sure everyone else who's playing the game has the same things that they're saying. I don't know if that impacts the way that they play out during the game, but it is really interesting to see the rankings that they have created and the way that players are reacting to these rankings.
Reagan, I just want to give you a chance to clear out one more time. Is there anything else that maybe you saw in these ratings? I brought up Kyler Murray, maybe a more underrated one. Is there any of those kind of underrated examples that you want to bring up?
I'm always going to cape for Cam Newton. I think he's a 78 overall right now. That's going to get higher by the end of the season. Guaranteed he's at least over 85. Other than that, it was kind of there's a clear drop-off right after Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz. There's a drop-off in talent. And after that, in the NFL world, there's a drop-off in talent there. But I don't think it's as egregious as the game made it out to be. I would have liked to see more dudes in the low rating range or 80 range. You mentioned Kyler Murray. I think it would have made sense to have him at least an 80 to 81 overall. But, yeah, man, I was not a fan at all of how they did the ratings this year. Hopefully, like you said, the dynamicity, I don't know if that's a word, but I just used it. I think that that'll fix things over the course of the season. But I'm just, like I said, I'm a little frustrated with what they're basing it on because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, I just want to give a quick shout out to our producer, Sam, here, who's a big Lions fan, and just say that the fact that Kirk Cousins is ranked a rating below Matt Stafford is a little wild to me. Just saying, playoff success. We could talk about that some other time. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of Sports Scene. Thank you to Lauren, Reagan, and even though he got kicked out due to technical difficulties, Nick, for coming on. It was a really fun show. One little programming note, we are going to be missing next week's show. But other than that, we are on every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And you can make sure to follow along at And Media Sports on social media. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.